In this tutorial, we will be learning about Python comprehensions. There are three types of comprehensions: the list comprehension, the dictionary comprehension, and the set comprehension. We will start with the list comprehension, which is basically a one-liner for loop. Here is an example. I for I in a range of 5. You may recognize this as kind of like the first example we showed in our previous video. This basically creates a list of numbers out of the range object call. Another way to write this is kind of like this. So let's say we have x equals to an empty list, and we have for I in range of 5, x.append I. Now we should have another list, which we do. So as you can see, basically for each item in the range of 5, you append it. Well, we can get rid of that append part by just using a list comprehension. So that first variable, I for I, the first I is basically I.append itself. You can actually use a list comprehension as a type of filter. So let's say we want to go over a range and just pull out the odd numbers in the range. So let's just try that real quick. So we have I for I, and we'll use a slightly larger number for range in 10. If I, we'll use the Modulus Operator, equals to 1. This should give us a list of the odd numbers with between 0 and 10, and it does. The Modulus Operator basically tells you if you have a remainder or not. If you do have a remainder, then it'll equal 1. And since all these numbers have a remainder, odd numbers will naturally be selected when you do it this way. Alright, let's take another look at another good use for the list comprehension. The Python documentation actually has an example where you take a list of lists and you can use a nested list comprehension to basically flatten those lists. We'll just use their example code because that makes it a little bit easier to follow. So, alright, we got one list, 4, 5, 6, there's a second list, and 7, 8, 9. So we have 3 lists, but we want this list of lists to just be a single list. So their example shows the following code: for element in vector, for num in element. If you run this, it'll take all those lists and turn them all into one long list. It's a little bit hard to read. You kind of have to read it backwards. Basically, well, it depends on how you look at it. Let's start from the beginning. So, for element in vector, so that's basically looping over each list. There's 3 elements. So for each of these 3 list items, we want to pull out the number, but we also want to pull each number out of each of those lists. So for each element within the sublists, return that number, and that ends up flattening the entire thing. Things can get really complicated because you can actually start using the Boolean operators and an OR as well, and you can make a really long one-liner that's really complicated and hard to follow. I don't recommend doing that, but you will come across those occasionally in the wild. Okay, let's look at a dictionary comprehension. They're slightly different, but the idea is pretty much the same. So let's say we have something like print I, will make a string of I, for I in range of 5. Oops, can't type range sometimes. Okay. Yep. Occasionally, you just get ahead of yourself. You just can't type what you want to type. All right. Sorry about that. Take a look at this. Okay, so this created a nice little dictionary comprehension that basically takes the number in the range, for each number in the range, turn that into a key, and for each number in the range, turn it into a string for the value. So you have the integer 0 as your first key in the dictionary, and then 0, the string, as your first value in the string. You'll notice that we're actually calling a function in here, and I forgot to mention that for the list comprehension too. You can actually call functions and lambdas and all kinds of good stuff in the list comprehension and make it really cool. So let's actually do that before we get too far along. So let's create a little function, which I know we haven't gotten to yet, but this makes things really interesting, and you guys should see the power of the list comprehension. So we'll just do this. Return A plus, we'll just say ABC. Okay. So let's go back and just do a quick list comprehension because I really want you guys to see how awesome this is. So for a function I, alright, let's see what this does. I think you'll find it really interesting. Alright, so in this case, the list comprehension calls the function for each loop through the list, or each loop through the iterable, which in this case is the string. So it loops through each of these numbers, calls the function, and adds that number plus ABC, which is why you end up with a list with 1 ABC, 2 ABC, 3 ABC. This gets really cool when you want to do something particular to an element that actually makes sense. Like if you need to multiply the element by 2 or do some kind of filter to see if this element needs to have something special done to it. Okay, the other thing to do with dictionary comprehensions, now that we go back to that, is that you can swap the dictionary's keys and values. So let's take a quick dictionary and try that out. So let's see, we have my dictionary equals to, I'll just make something up here. And let's see, so there we have a little animal dictionary. Now let's go ahead and swap things around. So for value and key, for key and value, in my dict items. Oops, there we go. Now as you can see, that swapped the values as the key for the keys. So now the values are the keys and the keys are the values. Kind of cool. I should note that if the value is a non-mutable type, such as a string or whatever, you may end up getting an exception that gets raised. So just be a little bit careful when you're doing this, because you could end up with just a goofy error that's a little bit hard to debug. But most of the time it'll work. I personally haven't had much use for dictionary comprehensions, so your mileage may vary. Alright, let's take a look at the set comprehension. Basically, you're creating another one-liner for loop, but this one returns a set instead of a dictionary or a list. Actually, let's take a look at, let's back up just a little bit. We want to create a set, and you may not know what a set is, so let's just create something goofy. Alright, so this list, whoops, hold on. Alright, this list has a bunch of duplicates in it. The idea behind a set is to remove the duplicates. So let's see what happens if we call set on this list. So this set returns just the single value. So it goes through and only returns one of each of the values in it. So there are no duplicates. Basically removes all the duplicates from the list. This can be really handy from time to time. For some reason, you can also create a set comprehension. I have never done this in all my years of programming, but I'm going to show you guys how to do it because it is kind of nice. I just don't know what I would use it for. Alright. So, what we want to do is create the same thing as we did before. So we'll just create mySet2 equals Oddly enough, another curly brace, x for x in my list. So let's see what my set2 ends up being. As you can see, that gate returned the same thing as calling set directly. So basically what you need to pay attention to is that you use curly braces for both dictionary comprehensions and set comprehensions. However, for the dictionary comprehension, you'll notice that there's a colon in the middle of it, so you have key colon value for items in whatever you're iterating over. Whereas in the set comprehension, it's basically like the list comprehension, except that it uses curly braces. It just item for item in whatever your iterable is. At this point, I think you're ready to try out doing comprehensions on your own. Good luck, and I'll see you next time.